Today on the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, episode number 32. How do you get boys to read? How do you make it fun to read? We answer those questions next to my guest, Hillary Tubin, the author of the book Boys and Books. Next in the podcast. Let's do this.
Welcome to the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, a podcast about a journey of discovery and conversations about not sitting on the sideline of life. Let's get involved. Here's host Joe Foley.
Welcome to the podcast. Hey, my name is Joe Foley, and I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast. If this is your first time, hey, welcome. This is a podcast for any parent or adult who wants to be more involved in their children's life or in their own life. Because we don't have always the answers, but we always seek out the answers. There'll be topics like sugar addiction, digital parenting, clearing the clutter. Talk about divorce, something that is quite common nowadays, and many more topics that help us to be a more involved person in this world. This will be a weekly podcast for us to have a conversation. What I mean is, I want to talk to you. Look up right in the right-hand corner, if you're looking at your computer, there's a speed pipe. Send a message. Or there'll be comments. You can comments in the show notes or leave a comment in the Facebook page. I really want to talk to you. I want to have a conversation. I'm not an expert, but I'm on a journey just like you. I don't have all the answers, but I want to explore them with you and trying to find out what really matters, how to be more involved, how to learn new things that help us get involved in the world. There's no more sitting on the sideline. Kind of weird I just said that, but there's no more sitting on the sideline. But it's true, because if we sit on the sideline, we become stale, become bored, and that's when bad things happen. So let's get involved. Next up, my interview with Hillary Tubin. Hillary is the author of the book Boys and Books. Hillary was a teacher for 22 years, and now she's a literacy consultant. Her mission is to help get boys to read through gamifying it or show them the benefits of reading. If you have a young son or a young child who's having trouble reading, you might want to listen to this interview. It may give you some inside ideas to help your children become better readers. So let's jump right into the interview with Hillary Tubin. Next. Today on the podcast, my guest, Hillary Tubin, former teacher. She's a literary consultant, author of the book Boys and Books, which was an Amazon bestseller. Hillary, welcome to the podcast, Hillary.
People, and everywhere I went, if I ordered a coffee and they knew that I was an American, I would sit down with my cup of coffee and 15 people would come over and just want to chat. And I ended up meeting the most amazing human being, so much so that I almost stayed.
Oh, that would have been cool.
That would have been cool. Then I wouldn't have met my husband, and that part would have been sad. But I would have been in Australia.
Well, they have a really cool accent too.
Yes, they do.
And really, really neat accent. And it'll be fun. It'll be a very fun experience.
It would have been.
Well, I guess you're on. I know where you're on to talk about reading and boys and reading. And what is your experience and what about boys and reading? And why is it is a topic that you're like you talk about so much?
So I became a teacher because I did not do well in school at all. I was the girl who was in more trouble than the boys because I had so much energy and I was all over the place and I was unorganized and I did not fit the mold of school. But the one thing that saved me was the fact that I was a reader. And the only reason why I even got into college was because of the reading that I did outside of my house. And so I was going to actually go to school to be a lawyer so I could go and fight schools so that way kids like myself who didn't fit the mold would be able to, have better experiences in school. And someone said, well, maybe you should be a teacher. And I thought, okay, that sounds fantastic. And really my biggest issue with school was during math. So this whole girl and math thing and math anxiety and girls can do math and empowering girls was really what was important. Well, I became a teacher, and I realized that with girls, if I said to them, no, you can do math, here's how, they said, okay, and then they did it. And so the girls were doing fine with math, but what I couldn't get a handle on was boys and reading. And the reason why was because reading was so ingrained in who I was, I couldn't understand what they didn't like about it. It made no sense to me how they got visceral. Like when I couldn't do math or the girls couldn't do math, you could tell we felt bad about it. Like we didn't lose our minds about it. But if you talk to boys about reading, they were getting so upset. And this really like bothered me because I knew that reading was so important and what it was going to do. So I went ahead and I had to figure out. I spent from my first year of teaching till my 22nd year of teaching, I worked with boys. I talked to boys. I worked with parents. I took so much schooling to study how do you motivate someone who doesn't want to read? And how do I, as a female that does not have the same interests as an 8-year-old boy, a 9-year-old boy, a 10-year-old boy at all, how do I learn how to appreciate who they are and what they want to read and not privilege what I want to read? So when I realized that boys really did want to read, deep down, like they wanted to read. And when you opened up the door for them, they walked through. But they only walked through if you opened up their door the way that they wanted the door to be open. So that's what you had to figure out. Like, well, how do you do that? And so then once I figured it out, I realized that I needed their parents' help because I needed the reading habit to take place at home. I couldn't do that in school. And so then I had to train the parents. And then all of a sudden I realized that, wait, boys can read. It just doesn't look like what we're doing right now in school. Mm-hmm. And so then when you look at their test scores compared to girls and you see how they're underachieving, they're underperforming, and there's always a gap. And so I worked to close that gap. I was like, I can do this. I can figure this out. I can get boys to close the gap. And I did. And then I just decided that the way things are with the world today and the way society's changing, and that we're this global economy and we're a very literate economy now. Oh my gosh, we have to get boys reading. So me just working in my classroom, isolated in one place, that's not going to help as many boys as I think I can help. So that's what I'm doing. And that's why I wrote the book. And I took everything that I did and I am putting it down into words and sharing it with others.
Well, it's interesting, obviously. I remember when I was, that age, we weren't very interested in books. I mean, when you had to go to the library, because they teach you tasters at the library, you look for the book that had the, space adventure, and you could pick A, B, or C and go in that direction. Because, it was the easiest one to read because I can go from the front of the book to the back of the book. And I'm like, teacher, I finished the book.
Yeah. Because you are very typical, and I had to tap into that. So if you were one of my students and I saw that was you, I had to figure out how to make reading a competition, how to help you take what your reward was, like what you were seeing as something that was, and how can I make it that I keep stretching you so you'd read longer books instead of the shorter books. And I have to work with you to get you to transform that.
Well, it's interesting. If they made all Batman stories, I think I'd be all set back then.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. If your teachers and your parents let you read them.
Exactly.
So that's pretty much what my focus has been, is opening up parents to the world of it's okay to have your kid read Captain Underpants. And in my second book that I'm working on called Cool Boys Read, my whole thing, it's like I can get boys to go from Captain Underpants to Shakespeare. So it's not the Captain Underpants per se. It's what happens with boys is that people tell them they can't read it. And so then they just gets into a power struggle about it. But if you let them read it, And then you just keep pushing them along and you just keep seeing, well, what is it about Captain Underpants or Diary of a Wimpy Kid or Batman? What is it that they like? And then you just start, I call them reading lab, and you start to move them to like more complex books and they don't even realize it.
Well, do you think sometimes maybe it'll be like peer pressure from the other students? Then they don't want you to, like they see you reading Shakespeare and they're like, the kids get ridiculed or picked on.
Right. So what I did, because I worked with middle school, was I got Kindles. So nobody knew what you were reading. So I was able to get a grant to get Kindles for my students. So that way they had their books inside. So everybody's Kindle looked the same. Mm-hmm. So I found that for boys, Kindles, e-readers, anything where no one really knows what they're reading is very helpful. Plus they're not heavy. And boys don't like to carry books that are heavy.
I can remember. I remember back in the you obviously you were going home with like the 7 books in your backpack. It's like if they push you one way, you're gonna fall over.
Yeah.
and wonder why they had bad backs after.
I know.
It's one thing I was interested in, the 10 building blocks. What was that about? I was interested in that.
So one of the ways that I figured out how to help boys was talking to their coaches. And because they were inviting me to sports games. And so I was watching the boys play and I realized that they did an amazing job out there. And I talked to their coaches and the coaches started to tell me the things that they did to get those boys to perform on the field. So then I started to think, okay, now how do I bring that to reading? So what I did was I spent a lot of time interviewing parents of boys who were already readers before they entered my classroom. And I wanted to know, what did you do? What did it look like? And did all of the boys who read, did all their parents do the same things? Just like really good coaches, they all have certain things and ways to motivate, boys to perform. How are they doing it? And it turns out that these parents of boys who did read all just intuitively did these same things. And so I took those things and I thought, all right, can I learn how to do them? Are they teachable? Are they learnable? Can I come up with a way that I can turn it around, think like a coach, think like these parents of boys who can read, and can I now become that person for the boys in front of me? And I could. Then I was like, all right, can I teach other people? Can I teach their parents to think this way at home? And I could. And so that's what the 10 building blocks are. Those are the 10 key things that I learned from the coaches and from the parents of the boys who already read, that then when I tried it on, I was like, oh my gosh, if I believe that boys will read, which is building block 1, amazing. Everything changed from that point on, because when you think about it, when boys don't read, the first thing people say is boys will be boys. Mm-hmm. That's what they do. Boys don't like to read. But if you think about it, and the first thing you do is believe that boys will read, now you cut all of that off, and now you're willing to do building block 2, which is invest. Invest in reading.
I have an interesting question when you're just talking about that, and I don't know if you can answer this. Reading kids when you're younger, does that help kids when they get older, like especially boys, and when they develop? If you keep reading to them, they'll just show their interest and keep reading more. Is that something that would work? Or
yes. So here's what happens, and this is where there's a big gap in the way we talk about reading. So parents, when kids are infants, they read to them, they work with them, they do all of these great literacy things. And then all of a sudden, boys go to school. And then everything changes. And so when I was working with my 3rd grade boys, some of the reasons why reading pained them was because their mom stopped reading aloud to them.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, you need to start reading to your son every night. I need you to do that. And lo and behold, when that same behavior that they did when the son was 4 and 5, and now he's 8 and 9, and the mom's like, I did this because I thought, hands off, you're in school now, you're a big boy reader. You don't need me. But it turns out that was where he got his pleasure from reading. And then when his mom just stopped reading, And this was multiple boys over my 22 years. That was one of the big things where it can work. And the boys that did keep reading, their parents kept reading aloud to them up until I had boys whose dads, they were reading, big, Tolkien together. They were reading different books together, but that started when they were really, really young. And that was a difference, if a child was never read to, or if a boy's parents decided to stop when they went to school, it made a big difference.
But it also probably helps with their vocabulary too.
Vocabulary is the number one thing that I push in my books, that why reading for pleasure, not school reading. I break down reading into 4 types. There's foundational reading where you learn comprehension and decoding and your strategies. There's your standardized reading, and there's mandatory reading where someone else is telling you what to read. You gain a little bit of vocabulary that way. Where the research shows you gain the most vocabulary is when you read for 30 minutes every day what you enjoy. Oh. That's how you build your vocabulary, which is why I got panicked, because the only reason why I got into college was because of all the reading I did outside of school. My math score was so low on my SATs, and the only reason why I could get into school was because my verbal was so high. And that didn't come from school. That came from my reading at home. Just I had a vocabulary from books. And when I was seeing that boys weren't reading, I was like, I can't teach you that much vocabulary. That's part of the problem. And that's why boys also have trouble writing. Because if you don't read a lot and you don't have the vocabulary, you don't have the structures and the frameworks, then writing becomes a challenge too.
You can see that a lot too, especially sometimes when the kids don't have that opportunity to read and stuff, and their parents and the vocabulary. You can see that down the road in adult life too. I wasn't a big reader till I started doing blog and podcasting and stuff like that. And now I notice I read more and my vocabulary has expanded. And words that I talk to you every day, and all of a sudden I'm like, that's how you spell that word. I'd say it every day. I'm like, that's it. That's what it is.
Yep. And that is those epiphanies. That's what you want to have happen to boys earlier. And a lot of what's been interesting about my book is the reaction of boys versus the reaction of sometimes teachers. The boys themselves are like, really? I can read? I might like to read? And that's why I'm calling my second book Cool Boys Read, because some of the coolest boys became readers in my class, and they became teachers. Oh, wow. They're now teachers and writing me saying, thank you so much. I'm now a 4th grade teacher.
That must have been a really nice for you, and must have been really heartwarming.
Very. And a couple, I'm going to be an English teacher now, and so those weren't things that they had in their minds, because these were boys who played sports. These were boys who were cool, and they came to me not reading. Reading wasn't cool. Reading was a girl thing. Reading wasn't what they did. And all of a sudden, when they noticed those changes that you noticed, and they were like, whoa, wait, this is exercise for my brain. Oh, something is growing and moving. Oh, my brain is, it works. Look at that. And then they would do more of it. And it actually took them to a place they didn't think they were going to go to.
It's also, the thing I like about what you were talking about, a little bit about you, and is the gamifying things, gamifying the reading. How does that work? It sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. Word gamifying.
So what I did with boys is, again, it's tapping into their competitive nature, but they're kind of they're competing against themselves, and they're trying to grow as a reader, and they set goals for themselves. And it's broken down into game plans. So there's a playbook. And so you're teaching them how to run plays with reading versus just sitting there. Because a lot of my boys, what they would tell me is, well, reading, you don't do anything. You're just sitting there. And I'm like, yeah, it looks that way. But you know how when you're out on a field and you're running around, that's what your brain's doing. And so I had to show them how active reading is and how much of a game it is, and that there's like this ladder in your head that you're running up and down. And your goal is it takes you about 90 days to be able to get from the bottom of the ladder, which are the lower order thinking skills that you use when you read, to the top part of the ladder. And it takes about 90 days, and you have to read every day for 30 minutes to be able to finally reach the top. So when you turn it into something that's action-oriented, that it's a game, I have it set up where there's the playbook, there's the game plans, their parent is the coach. Making it where it's not your mom, it's not your dad, it's not your teacher, putting them in a position where like their parent is there to give them the tools and then send them off to be on the field. But their field happens to be their comfortable reading spot with a book.
Do you ever have kids that just all of a sudden the spark just clicked like that?
Well, my favorite would be when reading, like boys especially would start to come to school early to tell me what they read that night. Like they're just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't wait. I was like, okay. And I used to have it where in the mornings I'd have office hours where if people wanted to come and they wanted to read with their friends or do little book clubs. Again, I tried to separate it out. Like, here's what I'm teaching and here's pleasure reading. I didn't want pleasure reading to be something that depended on me. It wasn't something that they got a grade. It was, this is a lifelong habit. It's a habit. My responsibility isn't to teach you how to brush your teeth. That's at home. You have to do that every day. That's how reading is. But what's fun about reading is to have space where you and your friends can get together and start and talk about books. So we'd have these morning conversations, and it would always start in the beginning of the year. It was mostly girls that showed up. And then at the end of the year, it was everybody. And the boys were there too. So yeah, there would be a lot of epiphanies, especially when you gave them a community of other boy readers. So I did a lot with mentoring.
Oh, that's then also it's a safe place to read. I just want a little bit about your book. You want to talk about your book, The Boys and Books, and where they can find that, about the book and stuff like that.
So Boys and Books, it's easy to find. You can get it on Amazon, and it's Kindle version or paperback, and you can get it on Barnes & Noble also.
Anything you want to offer, like with the 90 days and like that, and I know you're a literacy consultant. I didn't know anything on you offer from your website.
Yes. So one of my biggest pieces is this idea that when you're thinking in terms of football, what a boy needs is the coach. But it turns out that most people, teachers, parents, librarians, a lot of people, when they invite boys to read or they try to initiate the reading habit, they don't do it as a coach. They do it as the other supporting roles at a football game. So a lot of people, moms especially, are cheerleaders. There's the mascot. There's the referee. I was a referee commentator prior to becoming the coach. So you have your referee, you have your commentator, and you have your spectator. So on my website, I have a quiz for people to realize that you can download for free. How am I approaching my son and asking him to read? And then I have tips and I have blog articles on how can you start to initiate like a coach.
Where's the website again?
Hillary Tubin, T-U-B as in boy, I-N as in Nancy.com, HillaryTubin.com.
I guess wrapping up, final thoughts and where they can connect with you. Oh, obviously, we just told me HillaryTubin.com, but final thoughts.
So connect with me on my website. There's a contact page, and if you write me a note, I will get right back to you. I also have a Facebook page called Boy Responsive Literacy Consulting, and I am on there, and I put articles, and people can write to me on there, too, if they have any questions.
Well, thank you, Hillary. I really appreciate being on the podcast today, and it was a lot of fun talking about this subject, and it was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's all I have for the episode. I want to say thank you to Hillary Tubin from HillaryTubin.com. You can find more about Hillary Tubin and her services in the show notes at nosittingonthesideline.com/32. Also, if you want to get in touch with me with questions, any comments, feel free to leave comments in the show notes or send an email. You can find all my social media and email information at nosittingonthesideline.com/contact. Also, something I want to mention before on the way out the door is about the Patreon page. It's something I'm starting. And want to check that out, go to nosittingonthesideline.com/Patreon. Any dollar helps. $1 per episode, $1 a month, $5 a month, $5 per episode. All contributions really help towards the podcast. The one thing I take away from this episode and how important reading is it really is. I can give one little story about reading to my son, and he's now 4. And I guess reading 5 books seemed like a lot to read to him, but I just noticed how his vocabulary improved, how quickly he improved and talked more than his peers. So reading is important. I mean, reading is fundamental. It helps develop your vocabulary, your writing skills. I think I'm going to keep reading to my son. And encourage him to be a good reader. Well, again, thank you for listening to the podcast. Until next time, read a book to your son or daughter. Tell them how much you love them. Time is short. Enjoy every moment. Take care. God bless. See you.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates of the show and helpful and useful tips. This has been a production of Foley 42 Media.